with me and the Legislative Black Caucus and disavow Dick Harpootlian and what he had to say. It was wrong. And I'm asking you to join us, be on the right side.
I'm asking you to join me and join in the support I have from the overwhelming number of the members of that Black Caucus. I have more support in South Carolina in the Black Caucus and the Black community than anybody else. Double what you have or anybody else has.
But wait a second, Bernie.
Well, that is quite right.
Let's not argue about polls. This isn't about Bernie. This isn't about polls. This is not about polls.
I'm not talking about polls.
We have 9 members of the Black Caucus in South Carolina supporting us. But more importantly, much of what Elizabeth said is absolutely correct. We have a racist society from top to bottom, impacting healthcare, housing, criminal justice, education, you name it. And clearly this is an issue that must be dealt with. But in terms of criminal justice, what we have got to do is understand the system is broken, is racist. We invest in our young people in jobs and education, not more jails and incarceration. We end the war on drugs, which has disproportionately impacted African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans. We end private prisons and detention centers in America.
Bernie, I appreciate what you're saying.
And, excuse me, we also, most people don't know this, tonight in America, 200,000 people are in jail without having been convicted of anything.
That's right.
200,000 people, because they can't afford the $500 for bail they need to get out of jail. That is outrageous. We're going to end cash bail.
Okay, let me say this. I've worked to end cash bail in California, and it's gone. I've worked to end private prisons in California, and they're gone. I'm somebody our family, my wife and I, started a bank specifically to support businesses owned by women, Black people, and Latinos because they couldn't get financing anywhere else. But Joe, I want to answer. Really, I think you should come over and disavow the statements that this man made that were openly racist, that were wrong, and the Legislative Black Caucus is against. I'm asking you to join us and do the right thing.
I've already spoken to Dick Harpootlian, and he, in fact, is I believe, sorry for what he said. But here's the deal, folks. Look, we got to stop taking the Black community for granted. That's the starting place. Every one of the things we talked about here, for example, in South Carolina, Jim Clyburn, he has a program, 10, 15, 30. We should be investing our money in those communities that haven't gotten help for a long time and give most of that help to those communities. Make it a priority. We should make sure that we have no one going to jail for a drug offense. They go directly mandatory mandatory treatment, not prison. And we fund it. And we fund it, and 3 days doesn't get it. It takes at least 60 to 90 days to make any progress. We have to pay for that. Just like instead of building new prisons, we build new rehabilitation centers. We have to make sure that we have a window at the Treasury Department that allows entrepreneurs who are Black and brown and minorities to be able to get loans to be able to start businesses. You know, if you own a house, I know you do know, if you own a house in an all-Black neighborhood, same exact house in an all-white neighborhood, exact same shape, the house valued in the Black neighborhood would be valued as worth less, making it difficult for you to accumulate wealth, as my friend at the end of the line here says. So here's the deal. We have to do much, much more. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place. Redlining, to stop it. I got involved through the civil rights movement. I became a public defender. That's why I got involved. There's so many things we have to do across the board. And in education, at-risk schools, we should triple the funding we have for at-risk schools to provide for 4, 5, and 6 years old to be able to go, 3, 4, and 5 years old to go to school, not daycare. Increase the salaries of teachers. Encourage more Blacks to get into teaching, especially Black men, because the studies show when there's a Black man in a community, in a school, it increases prospects significantly, and so on. There's a lot we can do. I've laid it all out as how to do it. Go to joebiden.com. You'll see the whole deal, including criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As you mentioned, South Carolina, 3 weeks from tomorrow, they'll go to the polls to vote. Black voters make up about 60% of the electorate there. Senator Sanders, several weeks ago, Nina Turner, one of your national congressional co-chairs published an op-ed piece that said Vice President Biden has, quote, repeatedly betrayed black voters to side with Republican lawmakers and undermine our progress. Senator Sanders, do you agree with her, one of your most visible surrogates, that Vice President Biden has repeatedly betrayed black voters?
Well, I think what Senator Turner was talking about are some of the early actions of Vice President Biden. But no, Joe Biden is a friend of mine, and I'm not here to attack him. But what I would say is that what we need in terms of the African American community is to understand that we have got to start investing big time in education, in healthcare. There is no excuse why white families in America have 10 times more wealth than black families. No excuse that disproportionately African Americans are in jail compared to whites. No excuse for black women dying in childbirth 3 times the rate that white women are doing as well.
Senator Klobuchar. You had raised your hand before.
Yes, I did, because I think in addition to the economic argument we're making here with the sad stories of a woman walking into a maternity room in New Orleans and saying her hands are swollen and walking out without her baby, and 30% of African American kids living in poverty. We know that there are economic solutions here to invest in those communities, housing, childcare, but there's something else insidious going on that we haven't addressed, and that is the systematic racism when it comes to voting. That is moves across the country to limit people's right to vote, and that is why I have been leading on these bills to automatically register every kid to vote in this country when they turn 18. There is no reason that we can't do that across this country. To stop the gerrymandering by setting up independent commissions in every single state. And yes, to stop the voting purges. Because what is going on right now, in the words of one North Carolina court, is that they are discriminating with surgical precision against African American voters. And we are not going to be able to get any of these things done if we don't give people the right to vote.
Vice President Biden and then Senator Warren.
I beg your pardon?
I just wanted to give you a chance to respond.
Yes, I agree completely. There should be registration, automatic registration. Turning 18, you get a driver's license, whatever you do, you automatically are registered, number one. Number two, with regard to what we're going to see in South Carolina, we're all going to be there pretty soon. We'll see whether or not it works. The response to the letter that the person, I'm not saying Bernie wrote the letter, but the senator wrote the letter, was very brisk and significant with other African Americans in South Carolina taking issue with her. But look, Amy is right. The senator is correct. That is that we, in fact, there is systematic racism. And that's why our Justice Department works so hard to go after those. You know, realize there are 35 states in the United States of America that have come up with a total of 78 laws to restrict voting just in the last 5 years to try to keep African Americans from voting, and brown as well, black and brown people from voting. And that will be an enormous priority in my administration, as it was in ours. It's just wrong, simply wrong.
Senator Warren.
You know, I'm glad to stand on this stage with my fellow Democrats who talk about how important the black community is, at least at election time. Year after year after year, election after election after election, Democrats go to people in the black community and say, boy, we really care about these issues. Racism is terrible. We all want to do something. And then somehow the problem just seems to keep getting worse. Well, I think it's time we have real concrete plans that are going to make a difference in people's lives. I proposed a 2-cent wealth tax. And let me tell you just one of the things we can do with a 2-cent wealth tax. We can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. And because African Americans have to borrow more money to go to college, borrow more money while they're in college and have a harder time paying it back when they get out, that one law is going to help close the black-white wealth gap for people with student loans by about 20 points. We aren't making a difference in America. We're saying to the rich folks, you keep your money, and the rest of us will talk about racism, but not really do anything. I think the time for that is over. I'm ready to get in this fight and really make a change.
George. Okay, thank you. Actually, let's keep this debate going. Go ahead, Mr. Steyer.
Look,
of narrative comes policy. And we're talking about a lot of policies that affect Americans broadly and disproportionately affect Black Americans or Brown Americans. But what I believe is we should set up a commission on race and deal with race explicitly. Because everyone's saying we can't have rules that are different for different people, but in fact we're here because we had rules that are different for different people. I would set up a formal commission on race on day one to retell the story of the last 400 years in America of systematic racism against African Americans, not just legal discrimination, injustice, and cruelty, but also the contribution that the African American community has made to America in building it and in leading the entire country from a moral standpoint for generations and centuries. Because I believe out of narrative comes policy. We need to repair damage that's been done officially, and pretending we're all the same is not accurate. We got here a certain way. Let's talk about Jim Crow. Let's talk about Martin Luther King. Let's talk about Barbara Lee, the congresswoman from Oakland, who's one of our great leaders, and then let's figure out how to repair the damage so we can move forward together.
Mr. Yang, take on that argument and also what he said about reparations.
The median African-American household net worth is projected to be 0 by 2053. Things are not getting better for people of color. If anything, they're getting worse because we're in the process of eliminating the most common jobs in our economy. It's something of an economic unnatural disaster, and who suffers most in a natural disaster? People of color, people with lower levels of capital and access to opportunity and education. And while I know we love to champion education here as Democrats, only 33% of Americans are going to attend college. Lower percentage of African Americans. There is no way we can prevent this tsunami from wiping out African American net worth unless we put straight cash into their hands sometime between now and 2053. And it's not just them. It is truck drivers, it is retail clerks, it is call center workers, it is accountants, it is bookkeepers. We are in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, and it's going to hit Black people the hardest. We have to stop nibbling at the edges and actually start solving the real problem.
We've been getting a lot of questions. We've been getting a lot of questions from Apple News and tonight, including many about a candidate who's not on the stage tonight, but is in this race, and that is former Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York. And this question came in from Nashville, Tennessee. It says, billionaire Michael Bloomberg has entered the race and just got the endorsement of a former Trump Navy secretary. Why do you think you are better positioned than Bloomberg to beat Trump, Senator Warren?
Look, I don't think anyone ought to be able to buy their way into a nomination or to be president of the United States. I don't think any billionaire ought to be able to do it, and I don't think people who suck up to billionaires in order to fund their campaigns ought to do it. I heard everyone here talking about, as Democrats, we all want to overturn Citizens United because we want to end this unlimited spending. Yeah. Except everyone on this stage, except Amy and me, is either a billionaire or is receiving help from PACs that can do unlimited spending. So if you really want to live where you say, then put your money where your mouth is and say no to the PACs. Look, I think the way we build a democracy going forward is not billionaires reaching in their own pockets or people sucking up to billionaires. The way we build it going forward is we have a grassroots movement funded from the grassroots up. That's the way I'm running this campaign. If you think it's the right way to run a campaign, go to ElizabethWarren.com and pitch in $5 because understand this. Our democracy hangs in the balance. If we have to fund through billionaires, then we're just going to be in America that's going to work better and better for billionaires and not for anyone else.
So I can't stand the big money in politics. And one of my major focuses is going to be on passing that constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. I didn't come from money. And I just simply think people don't look at the guy in the White House and say, can we get someone richer? I don't think they think that. They want to have someone that they can understand. And you know my background. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines his whole life. He couldn't even graduate from high school because he had to raise his 9 brothers and sisters. My grandpa saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to a 2-year community college. That was my family's trust. And you can't send, like Donald Trump got from his family, you can't fit $413 million in a coffee can. My mom grew up as wanted to be a teacher in Wisconsin. She moved to Minnesota. She taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. And no, I am not a billionaire, but I stand before you today as the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, the daughter of a teacher and a newspaperman, the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota, someone who has passed over 100 bills as the lead Democrat in that gridlock in Washington, D.C. And that is because we live in a country of shared dreams. And that means no matter where you come from, you should be able to make it. So please help me in my efforts at amyklobuchar.com.
Everybody's getting the fundraising pitches out here right now. Senator Sanders, I am coming to you, but Mayor Bloomberg is. Let me just put the question to you, because Mayor Bloomberg has taken on your argument.
I got an answer before the question. It's more.
He says we need evolution, not revolution.
Can you hear that?
Mayor Bloomberg has said we need evolution, not revolution, taking you on directly.
Well, it's a funny thing. There are millions of people who can desire to run for office. But I guess if you're worth $60 billion and you could spend several $100 million on commercials, you have a slight advantage. That is nonsense. What we have got to do is have a nation in which we not only overturn Citizens United, we move to public funding of elections. In terms of money in politics, all right? Our campaign, and I am enormously proud of this, unlike some of the folks up here, I don't have 40 billionaires, Pete, contributing to my campaign, coming from the pharmaceutical industry, coming from Wall Street and all the big money interests. What we do have is we have now over 6 million contributions from 1.5 million people, averaging $18.50 a contribution. That is unprecedented in the history of American politics. If we want to change America, you're not going to do it by electing candidates who are going out to rich people's homes begging for money. The way we're going to do it is build a mass movement of working people who are prepared to stand up, not take money from these billionaires, not take money from Wall Street, but stand up to the drug companies in Wall Street. And if you want to be part of that political revolution, BernieSanders.com.
Mayor Buttigieg, close this round out.
We are going into the fight of our lives. Donald Trump, according to news reports, and his allies raised $25 million today. We need to go into that fight with everything that we've got. Now, I've been very clear on both my record, where I have sued pharmaceutical companies, and what I'm campaigning for, that includes raising wages and raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy. And as the only person on this stage who is not a millionaire or a billionaire, I know a thing or two about building a movement, because mayor of South Bend, Indiana is not exactly an establishment fundraising powerhouse. We are here without the involvement of any corporate PACs, because hundreds of thousands of people went to, yes, PeteForAmerica.com, contributed to this campaign. And let me say something else. If we want to bring about any of the changes that everyone is talking about so elegantly up here, we need to put together the majority that can decisively defeat Donald Trump. And in order to do that, we need a politics that is defined not by who we reject, but how we bring everybody into the fold. And if you are low income, or if you're able to contribute a lot, if you've always voted Democrat, or if you're an independent or even a Republican who's just sick of looking your kids in the eye and trying to explain this White House, we need you to join us right now. I will not pursue politics by telling people they can't be at our side if they're not with us 100% of the time. This is a time for addition, not rejection, for belonging, not exclusion.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you. I I want to turn to climate change and jobs here in America. President Trump just signed the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. Many call it an updated NAFTA. But it does include incentives to make cars here in North America, and it does open Canadian markets for American dairy farmers. Senator Sanders, as we sit here in New Hampshire tonight, both New Hampshire Senators Maggie Hassan and Senator Jeanne Shaheen supported this. They voted yes, calling it a real win for workers and for farmers. You voted no because you said you believe it takes us back years on climate. Were the senators from New Hampshire wrong?
Yes. I mean, it's a disagreement, but if you look at every environmental group in this country, including the Sunrise Organization, we're so proud to have their support because we have introduced the most comprehensive climate change proposal I think ever offered by a presidential candidate. What they are saying, what the environmental groups are saying, we're simply exporting fossil fuel emissions to Mexico. There is not one word in that trade agreement that deals with climate change. And I don't know how in 2020 you can do that. Second of all, there is, in terms of outsourcing of jobs, a major crisis in this country. Nobody believes that under this Trump trade agreement that there will not be continued and significant outsourcing of jobs into low-wage Mexico, where workers are paid in some cases less than $2 an hour. So I think the right vote was to vote against that agreement. I don't apologize for that.
Senator Sanders, thank you. I do want to go to Senator Klobuchar. You heard what Senator Sanders just said there. He said not one word on climate in the trade deal. So why did you vote yes?
Well, first of all, I want to defend the honor of the incredible two senators from New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, who work so hard for this state every day, and I voted with them. Why did I vote with them? Because there were some major improvements in this trade agreement when it comes to labor inspections, when it comes to getting rid of a sweetheart pharma deal that was in place. And when it comes to climate change, I think we have to have a North American trading bloc. We have to have Mexico and Canada and America working together. And the best way to take on climate change, as president, yes, I'll work to make this a part of every future trade agreement, but the best way to take on climate change is by getting back into the International Climate Change Agreement, which I will do on day one. It is bringing back the clean power rules, it is bringing back the gas mileage standards, and it is introducing sweeping legislation to put a price on carbon. And you cannot divorce trade from that, and in future trade agreements, that should be part of our negotiations. But I'm telling you right now, having no trade agreement with Canada and Mexico puts us at such a disadvantage when it comes to dealing with China and pushing China to do better when it comes to climate change.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you. Senator Warren, you voted yes as well.
Yes, I did, and I'll tell you why. Because there are a lot of farmers around this country that are really hurting because of Donald Trump's trade policies. There are a lot of workers who are hurting because they can't get enforcement of any workers' rights. So this NAFTA provision, after a lot of negotiation with Democrats, Senator Sherrod Brown helped make it a whole lot better. This makes things somewhat better for workers and for farmers. And when I see a law that makes things somewhat better for hardworking people in this country, I say I'll sign up for that, and then I'll get up tomorrow morning and I'll start working hard for a better trade deal on climate, a better trade deal that has a basic coherence to it. Everyone wants to get to the American market. We should be raising standards on climate around the world to get access to our market.
Mr. Steyer.
Yeah, I mean, I got to agree with Bernie Sanders. And I got to, I do. Senator Warren is right. Everybody wants to get into our market. And that's how we convince them that they've got to be right on climate too. That we can have to stop making foreign policy decisions in the old way. Yeah, of course we want to make things better for American workers. And it's absolutely critical that when we think about trade policy, we're thinking about it from the point of view of the American people, not of the American corporations. That's a huge positive change, and I agree with the senators on that. But there's something else going on here when we think about our foreign policy, and that's this. We talked about whether it was right to kill General Soleimani. And there was no discussion in that about where that leaves the United States in the community of nations around the world. So if we actually want to be the leaders of the world, the leaders of the free world, who can actually negotiate a climate treaty around the world that sticks, that makes a difference, we're going to have to put climate first. And when we think about doing the wrong thing the way Mr. Trump did with General Soleiman, we have to ask, does that help us build a coalition of countries around the world to do the right thing? It absolutely does not. Being all by ourselves, being the empire in the Star Wars movie, does not put us in a position to get done what we need to get done as the leader of the free world. And so, in fact, the USMCA is something that's the first step, but the second step is exactly what Bernie Sanders is saying. Use access to our market as a negotiating thing to make sure not only that we represent American workers, but that we represent the American people in the long run, and we make sure that we get a safe climate deal.
One of the things about being in the arena is you have to make decisions all the time.
Yes.
And these things aren't always exactly how you would do them. But in this case, if you want to criticize Trump for not ever having any friends, and I would agree, he always sides with tyrants over innocents. He always sides with dictators over allies. But I think you've got to have some friends. And those two countries, our neighbors, may not be perfect, but they are our friends. And we have a president that literally blames everyone in the world, and we have not talked about this enough. He blames Barack Obama for everything that goes wrong. He blames his Federal Reserve Chair that he appointed himself. He blames the King of Denmark. Who does that? He blames the Prime Minister of Canada for, he claims, cutting him out of the Canadian version of Home Alone 2. Who does that? That's what Donald Trump does. So my point here is that when we have opportunities to work with our allies, and New Hampshire is such a great example of this. New Hampshire, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire with senators like Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, who believe we need to work with NATO and the rest of the world, who sees it as a smaller state, but a state that is a piece of the world. We cannot be alone. And that trade agreement was not perfect. But the point of it is, if we start isolating ourselves from the rest of the world, we are going to hurt ourselves economically, and we are going to hurt our nation's security.
All right, Senator Klobuchar, thanks very much.
We have hit the 2-hour mark. We're going to take a quick break and come back with a final question.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis, 18,000 tons. Batatas. Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Your mom said, comb your hair. Your dad told you, smarten up. Your dog is judging you right now. And your best friend just called you crazy. We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. Now imagine getting your news like that. No bull, no spin, just give it to me straight. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
Ladies, are you ready?
Michael!
Sarah, come on, Kiki. I'm going to have some fun with this. We're going to talk about the good.
Right here in Times Square.
This is amazing, and it's funny.
I watch this show all the time. Whoa! Stop! You know, we family. We out here.
We out here, y'all.
Reagan, Sarah, and Kiki.
It's daytime talk done differently. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central, and Pacific on ABC.
And that's a wrap.
Next week, with no clear frontrunner, New Hampshire voters now have their say. Who will claim victory in this key first primary as Democrats fan out across the Granite State? World News tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast. Sunday, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, exclusive, right after the debate and right before New Hampshire votes. Now, after Iowa, can they rebound? Biden, Warren, George. Sunday on ABC's This Week with George.
Hi, welcome back to Manchester, New Hampshire and the ABC News Democratic debate. Thanks for joining us here on ABC News Live tonight. I'm Devin Dwyer, joined with our political correspondent, Rachel Scott. Rachel, we heard so much this last block about gun policy, abortion, climate change, and then the issue of race, pushed on by Tom Steyer, and really a lot of the candidates confronting Joe Biden, a sign of where this campaign is headed.
Exactly, Devin. Steyer tonight calling out the lack of discussion when it comes to race on that stage. The conversation turning 90 minutes into this debate, and Biden touting what the national polls reflect, his loyalty among African-American voters. I have sat down with the vice president. He has told me it's one of the things that he is most proud of, his loyalty among black supporters. And if you want to just see how important black voters are to the Democratic base, all you have to look at are the numbers from 2016. The exit polls from that primary, 6 out of 10 voters in Mississippi were black, 61% of voters in the South Carolina primary were black, and that's where the candidates are going to be heading very soon ahead of that.
And to Nevada as well, with a lot of voters of color there, and Joe Biden holding a lion's share of those voters. We'll see if these candidates can chip away. You know, we were talking so many of the policies we heard about tonight, like so many of the previous debates, are familiar positions from these candidates, which is why the style of their performance tonight is going to get a lot of attention from voters.
It will, but you know, when I talk to voters as I travel the country, they tell me their number one concern is electability. They want someone that could beat President Trump. They want someone that could carry this over the finish line. And that's why you hear so much of the discussion pivoting back to who can do that on that stage today.
And I was up in Derry, New Hampshire just yesterday hearing not only a lot of attention on those qualities of style, but also a lot of anxiety over this issue of electability, particularly now with Donald Trump's polling numbers on the rise, his performance at the State of the Union, and his acquittal in that Senate trial. It's going to be a 4-day sprint. I know you're going to be out there all weekend, as I will as well. And we were just talking about what this moment in this campaign will mean. We could see a dramatically smaller field after Tuesday night here in New Hampshire.
Yeah. Tom Perez came out here and he said, listen, we are beginning a 90-day sprint. Most of the delegates are going to be grabbed up by the end of this 90 days, and the candidates really have to hone in on their pitch here. The voting has started already. We're moving into the New Hampshire primary, and a lot of these candidates have a lot on the line here. They only have a few days left to gain momentum before that next vote is cast. And again, this race is getting tighter and tighter.
And we know Donald Trump will be here in New Hampshire and Manchester as well on Monday, so things are going to get a little even more exciting here as 4 days ahead of the New Hampshire primaries. We head back now for the final question in this ABC News Democratic debate. Take a look at the speaking times of the candidates. We'll leave you with that. Joe Biden, top of the list. All the candidates back at their podiums. Stay with us right here on ABC News Live.
From Manchester, the Democratic debate. Here now, George Stephanopoulos.
Welcome back to our debate. Time now for a final question. Each of you will answer it in turn. We'll start with Mr. Yang. And the question is this. According to the Children's Defense Fund, it's been more than 20 years since child poverty was directly addressed in a presidential debate. The year was 1999. The questioner was our friend and former colleague, who may be watching right now, the late Cokie Roberts. Cokie loved the New Hampshire primary, and she asked the candidates in this Republican debate, how will we overcome the scandal of 1/4 of American preschoolers living in poverty in the richest nation on earth? Today, nearly 1 in 5 American preschoolers are still living below the poverty line, even though we've had 10 straight years of economic growth. What does that say to you about where America is today and what we need to do about it?
George, we're in the midst of the most extreme winner-take-all economy in the history of our country. And unfortunately, that extremity is just going to reach unprecedented heights as technology is getting stronger, smarter, more capable all the time. And most of us are not. Most adults feel happy if we stayed about the same on any given day. So if we want to alleviate child poverty, we need to put money directly into the hands of families, particularly single parents. 40% of American children today are born to single moms. 90% of single parents are single moms. And right now, we have fallen into this trap where we have allowed the market to tell us what we are all worth. And what does the market value my wife Evelyn at, or stay-at-home parents around the country? 0. Caregivers taking care of ailing loved ones, like Carl Christensen in Iowa. 0. Volunteers and activists in our communities trying to do something positive, 0. Coaches and mentors helping our kids, 0. Most artists, sorry artists, but it's true, 0. Increasingly local journalists, which is wiping out our ability to have a functioning democracy because you can't vote on something if you actually don't have any news coverage. The mission in this campaign has to be for us to disentangle economic value and human value, say they are not the same things, and make this case to our fellow Americans that we each have intrinsic value as citizens, as human beings, and as owners and shareholders of the richest country in the history of the world.
Mayor Buttigieg.
The problem is America's been counting the wrong things. Now we have a president who says the economy is fantastic because the Dow Jones is looking good. And I'm sure if you've got a building with your name on it close to Wall Street, then that really is the same thing as the economy to you. But the problem is we've had an economy grow and not be able to lift up those most in need, or even so many in the middle. When I'm president, we're going to measure the performance of our economy not by the Dow Jones, but by the income growth of the 90%. Because a good economy is one where children are being lifted out of poverty, just as we focused in South Bend on cutting the poverty rate, in particular the black poverty rate, and making sure families with children were participating in the growth that we did have. But this is one more example of something where the American people want to see change. The American people, not just diehard Democrats, but so many independents and some Republicans think we need to prioritize economic equity, and yet it still doesn't happen. That is why we need to recognize that the time has arrived for a different kind of politics, to turn the page, leave the politics of the past in the past, and deliver a better future before it is too late.
Senator Warren.
So I started my grown-up life as a special education teacher. I learned early on about the worth of every single human being. And I believe that the best investment we can make as a nation, the best investment we can make as human beings, is to invest in our children. And we've had enough of making rhetoric around this. Everyone says they love the kids. But here's the deal. It's time to come up with real plans to make that happen. I've talked before about a 2-cent wealth tax. But the whole idea behind it is we can do early childhood education and good quality child care. Universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America. And we can stop exploiting the people, largely black and brown women who do this work, and raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America. We want to have a real future in this country. Then invest in our children. Don't leave public education just to our localities and our states. Be a good federal partner. Put real money into our schools. Put real money into housing. Put real money into health care. Put real money into the future of our children. That's how we build the America of our best values.
Mr. Vice President.
I come from a family where a dad walked in one day and said, "We got to move. Don't have a job. We got to move to a different city." I watched my dad, and I met many people here in this state and others who've gone through the same thing, where the fathers made that longest walk or the mothers made that longest walk. I was listed for the entire time I was in the United States Congress as the poorest man in the United States Congress. My net worth was net zero a couple times. The fact of the matter is that I've never focused on money for me. And I was a single dad for 5 years. It's not as hard as being a single mom, and I had help from my sisters in the audience and others. But the fact is that I think we have to focus on what is at stake here. These aren't someone else's children. They're all our children. They're the kite strings that lift our national ambitions. No, they really are. That lift our national ambitions aloft. We have an overwhelming interest in seeing to it they do well. 24 out of every 100 students in school today, from grade school to high school, are Latino. What are we going to do? Walk away from that? Many of them come from homes that are poor, very poor. That's why I invest so much time and energy in preschool. That's why if I only have $1 to spend, I spend it equipping the child before they get into school in the early days than after. And we talk about all those kids out there that are going to be graduating. A great number of them aren't going to, as Mr. Yang said, aren't going on to college, although I think we should help with college. They're not going on to college. What they're going to do, they're going to be equipped to compete in the 21st century by training them for the new trades, the new opportunities, the new capabilities that are out there. We must focus on our children. Like I said, they're all our children. They're not somebody else's kids. Everyone, as my father would say, is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect, and we're not doing it.
Senator Sanders.
Well, the answer to your question is why we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, disproportionately high for the African American community, by the way, is the same reason that we give massive trillion-dollar tax breaks to the rich and large corporations. Same reason that we give tens of billions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks to the fossil fuel industry, while half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. The same reason that we have 3 people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. The same reason that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. Same reason as to why we are paying, in some cases, 10 times more than other countries for prescription drugs. And that reason is that our priorities are determined by the 1% and by wealthy campaign contributors. Our priorities are determined by those who want to see the rich get richer and are turning their backs on the working families of this country. And what is unique about our campaign is we say unashamedly, we are raising our campaign contributions not from billionaires, but from working class people. That our campaign is about the working families of this country, for the working class of this country. And that is the administration that we will run. It is time to take on the big money interest. It is time to change our national priorities. Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
In Koki's memory, let me answer this question. We may have lost an election in 2016, Democrats, but we did not lose hope. And there is a way. It's actually based on a National Academy of Science report, and I've used that to put together a plan to reduce child poverty in half in 10 years and eradicate it in a generation. We can do it with investment in childcare. We can do it with investment in preschool and school, and we can do it with tax credits, and we can get it done. But to get it done, we have to be able to reach those voters that we lost in this state and across the country. There's an old story of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and when he died, his body was put on a train and went up across America. And there was a guy standing by those tracks along with so many Americans, and he had his hat on his chest and he was sobbing. And a reporter said, "Sir, did you know the president?" And the guy says, "No, I didn't know the president, but he knew me. He knew me." And I will tell you this, there is a complete lack of empathy in this guy in the White House right now. And I will bring that to you. If you have trouble stretching your paycheck to pay for that rent, I know you, and I will fight for you. If you have trouble deciding if you're going to pay for your child care or your long-term care, I know you, and I will fight for you. If you have trouble figuring out if you're going to fill your refrigerator or fill your prescription drug, I know you, and I will fight for you. I do not have the biggest name up on this stage. I don't have the biggest bank account. I'm not a political newcomer with no record, but I have a record of fighting for people. I'm asking you to join us at amyklobuchar.com. I'm asking you to believe that someone who totally believes in America can win this. Because if you are tired of the extremes in our politics and the noise and the nonsense, you have a home with me. Please, New Hampshire, I would love your vote, and I would love the vote of America. Thank you.
Mr. Steyer.
So, the Republicans have a cruel plan, and their plan is pretty simple. It's to cut taxes on the richest Americans and the biggest corporations, And then they pay for it by cutting education for kids, by cutting health care across the board, by allowing corporations to pollute as much as they want, and then they try and break unions and the organized labor movement. It's very simple. That's what Mr. Trump's plan is, and it's true in every single red state. But we are not going to win by just criticizing Mr. Trump. I know that there is a better America out there, and that America lives in our hearts and minds. And that America understands that when a kid succeeds in Columbia, South Carolina, that is a triumph for every American. And the same is true of a kid in Las Vegas, Nevada. Mr. Trump has no idea what prosperity looks like across this country. It's not just that he does bad things. He doesn't understand that investing in education and healthcare and good union jobs is actually an investment in our common humanity and in growth in the future, mobility, and justice. That is the America that lives in our hearts and minds that will beat Mr. Trump, because he will never be able to imagine it. So in fact, what we need to do is have a new conception, a new dream of America, dream it and make it happen. Imagine the mountain, and then we climb it together. We are in perilous times. I am asking for your vote. Let's rise together.
Candidates, thank you. Thanks for a great debate tonight. Thanks to our audience here at St. Anselm College. Thanks to our partners, WMUR and Apple News. And now I'd like to send it to my colleagues, Martha Radish.
Thanks very much, George, and good evening from high above the debate stage here in Manchester after the sometimes fiery exchanges between the top 7 Democratic candidates. It was a profoundly important debate, the last big chance for the candidates to make their case before the first-in-the-nation primary this Tuesday. We have a lot to discuss, and we will be heading over to the spin room with my colleague Tom Yamas and our panel of ABC political contributors shortly. But first, here with me as we watch the candidates leave the stage. Elizabeth Warren leaving rather quickly there. Pete Buttigieg staying on stage. Joe Biden as well, and Bernie Sanders. A big hug there between Pete Buttigieg and his husband, Chasten. Bernie Sanders, his wife Jane. They're Chasten and Pete Buttigieg again. Bernie Sanders, a long day that started this morning. Pete Buttigieg going towards the audience there, shaking some hands. Joining me here on the stage up here, John Carl, our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, our senior congressional correspondent.